My mom is very sick, the little girl said, her small hand clutching the sleeve of a man she had never seen before. The man turned immediately, startled by the urgency in her voice. He looked down at the little girl. "Hey, slow down," he said gently, lowering himself a little so he could see her face. "Who are you? Why are you standing here alone telling strangers your mom is sick? You should call a doctor." "I'm not a doctor. I did call the doctors," Annie said quickly, trying very hard to keep her voice steady. "I went to the desk and I told them my mom is very sick. She's been in pain and she can't breathe right. But they ignored me. My mom is very tired. She's getting worse, but nobody is coming. Nobody cares." The man's expression shifted, the confusion slowly replaced by something more serious. "What's your name?" "Annie. Annie Johnson. My mom is in room 614. How long has she been here?" "Many days," Annie said. "She was getting better, but now she's sick again. She keeps asking for her medicine, but they said we have to wait. They always say we have to wait." He glanced toward the reception desk again. The nurse behind the counter was typing, not looking at them. Another staff member flipped through a folder without interest. He looked back at Annie. "Is there someone else with you? Any family? Someone who can help you talk to the hospital?" Annie slowly shook her head. "No, sir. It's just me and my mom." He studied her face for a moment, then asked quietly, "You really don't have anyone else who can help you tonight?" Annie hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded hospital bill. The paper was worn and creased, like she had been holding it all day. "They said we have to pay before they can continue the treatment," she said. "My mom told me not to worry, but I know she's worried. So I brought the money today. I brought all of it. But I was in a hurry because my mom was in pain, and I think I dropped it in the lobby. When I went back, it was gone." She looked down at the bill, then back at him. "Sir," she said softly, "my mom is very, very tired. I tried to call the doctor, but they said we have to wait. If we keep waiting, my mom will get worse. Please, can you help my mom? I'm not asking for money for me. I just need someone to help my mom." The man exhaled slowly and looked toward the long hallway that led to the patient rooms. Then he looked back at Annie. "What's your mother's name?" he asked. "Sarah Johnson," Annie said immediately. "Sarah Johnson. She's in room 614. They said she's in the financial review list. I don't know what that means. I just know she's very tired." The man nodded once, then gently removed Annie's hand from his sleeve, not to push her away but to move with purpose. He turned and walked straight to the reception desk. His posture had changed completely. He no longer looked like a visitor. He looked like someone used to being answered. "Excuse me," he said to the receptionist, his voice calm but firm. "I need you to check a patient for me. Sarah Johnson. I want to see her file, her treatment status, and why she hasn't received medication tonight." The receptionist barely looked up at first. "Sir, if you're not family, you can't access patient." He placed a black card on the counter and slid it toward her. Everything changed in less than 2 seconds. The receptionist looked down at the card, then back up at him, her eyes widening slightly. The nurse beside her stopped typing. The administrator behind them went very quiet. "I asked a simple question," the man said, his voice still calm. "Sarah Johnson. What floor, what treatment status, and why is there a note about billing review before treatment?" The receptionist quickly turned to the computer. Her fingers moved faster now. "Yes, sir. Sarah Johnson, room 614. She's currently listed under pending insurance authorization and outstanding balance review. There was a note from administration to delay non-emergency medication until billing clearance." "Delay medication?" the man repeated slowly. The receptionist swallowed. "That's what the file says, sir." Behind him, Annie stood very still, holding the wrinkled hospital bill with both hands, watching the adults talk in words she didn't fully understand but somehow already knew were the reason her mother was alone in that room without medicine. The man picked up his card again and put it back into his coat pocket. "Call the attending physician," he said, "and the floor nurse. Tell them William Carter is here, and I'm going to room 614 right now. If that patient does not receive treatment immediately, This hospital is going to have a much bigger problem than an unpaid bill. The receptionist's face went pale. Yes, Mr. Carter, right away. Annie looked up at him when she heard the name, but it didn't mean anything to her. To her, he was still just the man who stopped walking when she said her mom was very sick. He turned back to her and his voice softened again. Take me to your mom, Annie. She nodded and started walking beside him down the long hallway, her small steps quick, trying to keep up with his longer stride. Behind them, phones started ringing. Nurses began moving faster. A doctor's name was called over the intercom. For the first time that night, the hospital was no longer ignoring room 614. William Carter did not slow down as he walked beside Annie toward room 614. When they reached the room, 2 nurses were already inside. One was checking the monitor, another was preparing an IV line that should have already been running. A doctor stood at the foot of the bed, reviewing Sarah Johnson's chart with the focused expression of someone who had suddenly realized this patient now mattered. The change was immediate, and it was obvious why. Annie went straight to the bed. Mom, she said softly, taking her mother's hand. They came. They're here now. Sarah Johnson opened her eyes slowly. The pain was still there, but the sharp edge of panic had softened now that people were finally moving around her bed instead of past it. A nurse adjusted the pillow behind her. We're restarting your medication and fluids, she said gently. The doctor wants new tests tonight. Sarah looked confused. I thought my treatment was on hold. The nurse hesitated for a fraction of a second. We're taking care of it now. William stood near the door, silent, watching everything. The IV bag was hung. Medication was brought in. The monitor was adjusted. The room, which had been forgotten an hour ago, was now suddenly efficient and attentive. After a few minutes, the doctor finished writing notes and turned to William. Mr. Carter, may I speak with you outside? William nodded and stepped into the hallway, closing the door quietly behind him. The doctor exhaled once, like a man who had been holding his breath. Her medication should not have been delayed. The problem is administrative. When a file is flagged by billing, certain treatments require authorization codes. Without those codes, the system marks the treatment as pending. Pending, William repeated. That's the word the computer uses. What word do you use when a patient lies in pain for 2 days without medication? If this story touched your heart, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from because every story connects people from different places. And if you believe kindness still matters in this world, please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story. The doctor did not answer immediately. This hospital treats thousands of patients, he said carefully. But not all of them are treated the same. That's the truth. How long has her medication been delayed? The doctor looked down at the chart in his hand. 2 days. William looked through the small window in the door. Inside, Annie was standing beside the bed, holding her mother's hand and talking quietly to her. 2 days, he thought. 2 days is a very long time when you are in pain. I want a report, William said. How many patients in this hospital are currently under billing review with delayed treatment? The doctor looked surprised. That information is handled by administration. I know exactly who handles it, William replied calmly. Get it anyway. The doctor studied his face for a moment, then nodded. Yes, sir. When William went back into the room, Sarah was more awake now. The color had not fully returned to her face, but she was breathing easier with the oxygen line in place. She looked at him with tired, careful eyes. The nurse said you spoke to administration, she said. I don't want any trouble. I just need a little more time. I was going to pay the bill. My daughter brought the money today, but she lost it. It's not the hospital's fault. It's mine. William pulled a chair closer and sat down beside the bed. Right now, he said. You don't need to worry about the bill. Sarah gave a small, sad smile. Everyone says that until the bill is due. I'm not everyone, he said. She studied his face, trying to understand what kind of man sits in a hospital room in the middle of the night talking about bills like they were not the most important thing in the world. I've always paid what I owe, she said quietly. I work. I don't ask for charity. I just got sick before I had enough saved. William nodded once. Getting sick should not be a financial decision. She let out a tired breath. In this country, it is. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Annie walked over and stood in front of William again, very serious. "Sir," she said, "I'm sorry I grabbed your coat. You don't have to apologize," he said. "I didn't know what else to do," she continued. "They listen to adults. They don't listen to me." William looked at her for a long moment, but no one had ever said to him, "You listened," like it was something rare. "I'm glad you stopped me," he said. Annie nodded, as if that confirmed something she had been hoping was true. "Will my mom have to leave the hospital?" she asked. William glanced at Sarah, then back at Annie. "No," he said. "Your mom is staying right here until she gets better." Annie seemed to release a breath she had been holding for days. She didn't smile widely or jump or cry. She just nodded once and said, "Okay," like someone who had just received very serious news and accepted it. Sarah watched the two of them, and something in her expression changed, not relief exactly, but the cautious hope of someone who had learned not to trust good news too quickly. "Why are you helping us?" she asked again quietly. William thought about the question. He could have given many answers about charity, about foundations, about policy, about healthcare access. But none of those answers would have been the truth, so he told her the truth. "Because you were alone," he said, "and you shouldn't have been." Sarah looked at Annie, who was now carefully folding the hospital bill and putting it back into her pocket like it was still important, even though it had already caused so much trouble. "Thank you," Sarah said softly. William nodded, but he did not say "you're welcome," because as he sat there in that small hospital room, listening to the quiet beeping of the monitor and watching a tired woman and her daughter hold on to each other like they were the only two people in the world, he had the strange, uncomfortable feeling that this was not a simple act of helping someone. William Carter did not sleep much that night. He sat in his apartment overlooking the Boston skyline, a glass of untouched water on the table beside him, his suit jacket folded over the back of a chair. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the window, glowing in gold and white, the kind of view people worked their entire lives to earn. Normally, this view made him feel powerful, in control, like he was standing above the noise of ordinary problems. Tonight, all he could see was a small hospital room on the 6th floor and a girl standing on a chair, holding her mother's hand so she wouldn't be alone. He loosened his tie and sat down at his desk, opening his laptop. Within minutes, he had access to St. Matthew Hospital's administrative system, ownership structures, investment groups, operating costs, billing policies, insurance partnerships, numbers and policies. Everything looked clean on paper, efficient, profitable, logical, but now he knew what those policies looked like at 2 in the morning in room 614. He found the billing protocol document and read the line twice to make sure he understood it correctly. Non-emergency treatments for accounts flagged under financial review may be temporarily delayed pending authorization. Temporarily delayed. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen. Somewhere along the way, medicine had learned how to speak the language of banks. He closed the laptop and rubbed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with work. The next morning, he went back to the hospital earlier than he had planned. He did not bring an assistant, a lawyer, or a press contact. He came alone, wearing a simple dark coat instead of a tailored suit. The receptionist recognized him immediately this time and stood up straighter. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." "Good morning," he replied. "How is Sarah Johnson in room 614? "She's stable," the receptionist said quickly. "She received her medication overnight, and the doctor scheduled additional tests this morning." "Good," he said. "I'd also like the report I requested. The list of patients currently under billing review with delayed treatment." The receptionist hesitated. "Administration is preparing that." "I'll wait," William said. He did not sit in the private office they offered him. Instead, he sat in the public waiting area where Annie had been standing the night before. The chairs were hard plastic. The coffee from the vending machine tasted burnt. Across from him, an elderly man was arguing quietly with a clerk about a prescription he could not afford. A young mother rocked a baby while filling out forms she clearly did not understand. A construction worker with a bandaged hand stared at a clipboard like it was written in another language. William watched all of it without saying a word. After about 20 minutes, Annie appeared at the end of the hallway. She spotted him immediately and walked over, a little surprised but not shocked, like she had hoped he would come back but didn't want to assume. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would," he replied. She nodded, accepting that answer. "My mom said thank you," she said. "She said she can breathe better today." "I'm glad," William said. "Did you eat breakfast?" Annie shrugged slightly. "I had crackers." He stood up. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you something better than crackers." A few minutes later, they were sitting in the hospital cafeteria. Annie had a bowl of oatmeal and a carton of milk. William had coffee he didn't really want but needed something to hold while he thought. Annie ate slowly at first, then faster when she realized no one was going to take the food away. "Sir," she said after a few minutes, "are you a very important person?" William almost smiled. "Why would you ask that?" "Because when you talked to the desk, everyone started moving very fast," she said. "That doesn't usually happen." He looked at his coffee. "Sometimes people move fast for the wrong reasons," he said. Annie thought about that while she ate another spoonful of oatmeal. "My mom says people show who they are when someone is in trouble," she said. "Some people help. Some people look busy." William nodded slowly. "Your mom sounds like a smart woman." "She is," Annie said immediately, with quiet certainty. A woman in a gray suit approached their table. "Mr. Carter," she said. "I'm Linda Parker, legal counsel for Street Matthew Hospital. The board asked me to speak with you." William gestured to the empty chair. "Sit down, Miss Parker." She sat, placing a folder on the table. "We understand you're concerned about a patient, Sarah Johnson, and about certain billing procedures. We want to assure you the hospital follows all legal and regulatory guidelines." "I'm sure you do," William said. "Legally." She studied him carefully. "Hospitals have to make difficult financial decisions every day. If we provided unlimited care without financial structure, the hospital wouldn't survive." William leaned back slightly. "And if patients don't survive the financial structure?" She did not answer that directly. "We are willing to review Miss Johnson's case as a special consideration." William looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not asking you to review a special case," he said. "I'm asking how many cases like hers exist." She slid the folder toward him. "This is the report you requested." William opened it. The list was longer than he expected. Names, ages, conditions, status, pending financial review. Delayed, delayed, delayed. He closed the folder slowly. Across the table, Annie was finishing her milk, swinging her feet slightly under the chair, not understanding that the folder in front of William contained a quiet map of how many people were currently waiting for permission to be treated. "Miss Parker," William said calmly, "how long has this policy been in place?" "Several years," she replied. "And in those several years," he said, "how many patients got worse while waiting for billing approval?" "That would be difficult to quantify," she said carefully. William nodded once. "Of course it would." Annie looked between them. "Are you two talking about hospital stuff?" she asked. "Yes," William said. She nodded. "Hospitals are supposed to make people better," she said simply. "Not make them wait." Linda Parker looked at the girl, then back at William. "Mr. Carter, policies don't change overnight." William closed the folder and placed his hand on top of it. "No," he said quietly, "but sometimes they change because one person finally decides they have to." He stood up, picking up the folder. "Thank you for the report, Miss Parker," he said. "I'll be in touch." As he and Annie walked back toward the elevators, Annie looked up at him and asked, "Are you going to help the other people too?" William looked down at her. He thought about the list of names. He thought about room 614. He thought about the sentence, "temporarily delayed." "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "But I know I can't pretend I didn't see it." Annie nodded, as if that answer was enough for now. When the elevator doors opened, William realized something he had not expected when he walked into the hospital the night before. He had come there as a visitor, but he was beginning to understand that he was leaving as something else entirely. William Carter stood for a long time outside room 614 before he knocked. Through the small glass window, he could see Sarah sitting up slightly in the bed now, a tray in front of her with untouched hospital food. Annie was sitting in the chair beside her, drawing something on the back of an old billing envelope with a pen she must have borrowed from the nurse's station. The scene looked calm, almost ordinary, but William had already learned that hospitals could look peaceful and still be cruel. He knocked softly and stepped inside. Sarah looked up first. "Mr. Carter," she said, a little surprised. "You came back." "I told Annie I would," he said. Annie held up the paper she was drawing on. "I'm making a get well card," she said. "Hospitals are nicer when there are colors." William walked closer and looked at the drawing. It was a simple picture. A small room, a bed, a woman lying down, and a little figure standing beside the bed holding her hand. Above them was a large sun in the corner of the page. "That's a very good sun," he said. "It's for when we leave," Annie replied. "Hospitals don't have enough sun." Sarah watched the two of them, her expression thoughtful. "You don't have to keep coming here," she said quietly. "You've already done more than enough." William pulled the chair closer again and sat down. "I read the hospital's billing policy last night," he said. Sarah gave a small, tired smile. "That sounds like a very boring way to spend an evening." "It wasn't boring," he said. "It was very clear." She looked at him carefully. "Clear about what?" "Clear about why you didn't get your medication for 2 days," he said. Sarah looked down at her hands. "They told me my file was under financial review. They said it happens sometimes. They said I just needed to be patient." "Were you?" he asked. She let out a quiet breath that was almost a laugh. "When you don't have money, patience becomes part of your personality." Annie looked up from her drawing. "What's financial review?" she asked. Sarah hesitated, then said gently, "It means the hospital is checking papers." Annie frowned. Papers shouldn't be more important than people. Neither adult answered her, because there was nothing to correct in what she had said. William leaned forward slightly. "Miss Johnson, what do you do for work?" "I'm a nurse aide," she said. "I work at a long-term care facility. I help patients eat, bathe, take their medication, get to the bathroom. I work the night shift mostly." He nodded. "So you take care of people who can't take care of themselves?" "Yes," she said simply. "And when you got sick," he said, "who took care of you?" She didn't answer right away. Annie looked between them, sensing the question was important. Finally, Sarah said quietly, "My daughter did." William looked at Annie. She had gone back to drawing, but she was listening to every word. "Do you know how much the hospital bill is now?" he asked Sarah. She nodded once. "I stopped looking at the exact number. It doesn't get smaller when you look at it, and if you can't pay it, they'll discharge me," she said. "Even if I'm not ready, they'll say I can recover at home. But I live on the 3rd floor. No elevator. And I still get dizzy when I stand too long." William leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. He had funded entire hospital wings that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime. He had signed checks large enough to build research labs. He had attended charity galas where people applauded donations that had more to do with tax strategies than compassion. But none of those rooms had Annie's drawing taped to the wall with a piece of medical tape. "Ms. Johnson," he said finally, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." She looked at him. "All right, if you had received your medication on time 2 days ago," he said, "would your condition have gotten worse like this?" She held his gaze for a long moment. "No," she said quietly. "It wouldn't have." The room went very still. Annie stopped drawing. William nodded once, slowly, like he had just confirmed something he already knew but didn't want to believe. "Thank you for being honest," he said. Sarah gave a small shrug. "Honesty is cheap. Hospital bills are not." Annie slid off the chair and walked over to William. She held out the drawing to him. "You can have it," she said. "So you don't forget us." He took the paper carefully. "I don't think I could forget you, even without this," he said. She nodded, satisfied with that answer, and climbed back into her chair. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Linda Parker stepped into the room, holding another folder. "Mr. Carter," she said, "the board would like to schedule a meeting with you this afternoon regarding your concerns." William stood up slowly. "I'm sure they would." She glanced at Sarah and Annie, then back at him. "These matters are complicated. Healthcare is a business as well as a service. William looked at her. People always say that, he replied. But they never say which part comes first. She didn't answer. After she left, Sarah looked at him with concern. You shouldn't get into trouble because of us, she said. People like me don't change systems like this. We just try to survive them. William folded Annie's drawing carefully and put it into the inside pocket of his coat. Maybe that's the problem, he said. Maybe the system only changes when someone who helped build it decides to stop protecting it. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him this time, like she was beginning to understand that this man sitting in the chair beside her hospital bed was not just a kind stranger who had done a good deed. You're not just a donor, are you? She asked quietly. William did not answer directly. Instead, he said, this afternoon I'm going to have a meeting with the people who run this hospital, and I'm going to ask them one question. What question? Annie asked. He looked at her. I'm going to ask them, he said. How many people have to get sicker before a bill becomes more important than a human life? Annie thought about that, then said, that's a good question. You should ask it loud so everyone can hear. William almost smiled. I plan to, he said. When he left room 614 again, he did not walk slowly through the hallway this time. He walked like a man who had finally decided which side he was on, even if he had not yet said it out loud. And in his coat pocket, folded carefully, was a drawing of a small hospital room with a bright sun in the corner waiting for the day someone in that room could walk outside and see the real one. The boardroom at St. Matthew Hospital was made of glass, steel, and silence. William Carter had sat in hundreds of rooms like this, rooms designed to make difficult decisions sound reasonable. The long, polished table reflected the overhead lights like a mirror. On the walls hung framed photographs of donors shaking hands, ribbon cuttings, smiling administrators beside new medical equipment. Success stories, progress, generosity with plaques attached. But William had brought something into the room that did not belong in framed photographs. He had brought a list of names. Linda Parker sat across from him, composed as ever, a legal pad in front of her. Beside her sat 2 hospital executives and a representative from the financial board. At the far end of the table sat a man in his late 50s with silver hair and a perfectly measured voice, Chairman Robert Parker, the man who oversaw the hospital's financial operations. William, Parker said, folding his hands on the table, we appreciate your concern. Truly, your foundation has supported this hospital for years, but you have to understand, hospitals are complex systems. We cannot operate on emotion. William placed the folder on the table and opened it slowly. I'm not here because of emotion, William said. I'm here because of policy. He slid the list across the table. Robert Parker glanced down at it. What is this? This, William said, is a list of patients whose treatment has been delayed due to billing review. Linda Parker spoke carefully. Those are temporary administrative holds, not denials of care. William looked at her. One of those names is Sarah Johnson, room 614. Her medication was delayed for 2 days. Her condition worsened because of that delay. Is that also an administrative hold? No one answered immediately. Robert Parker leaned back slightly. The policy exists to keep the hospital financially stable. Without financial stability, no one gets treated. William nodded once. That's the argument everyone uses. But I have a question. He looked around the table, making eye contact with each of them before he spoke again. How sick does a patient have to become before the bill stops being more important than the treatment? Silence filled the room. One of the executives cleared his throat. It's not about choosing money over patients. It's about managing limited resources. William tapped the list lightly with his finger. These are not numbers. These are people waiting in hospital beds while computers decide if they're worth treating. Linda Parker's tone remained calm, but there was tension under it now. What exactly are you proposing? William, I'm proposing that no patient in this hospital has medication delayed because of billing status, he said. Not one, not ever again. Robert Parker shook his head slowly. That would cost millions. William held his gaze. Then we find the millions. And where exactly do you think that money comes from? Parker asked. William didn't hesitate. From the same place the profits come from. The room went very quiet. One of the executives leaned forward. You're talking about restructuring the entire billing priority system. Insurance companies, pharmaceutical contracts, administrative costs. This is not something you change because of one patient. William's voice stayed calm. I'm not here because of one patient. I'm here because I finally saw what the policy actually does to people. Robert Parker studied him carefully. You helped design the financial structure for half the hospitals in this network, William. You know exactly how the system works. Yes, William said. I do. That's why I know it can be changed. Linda Parker closed her folder. Even if we wanted to change it, it would take time. Reviews, committees, budget adjustments. William nodded. People in room 614 don't have time for committees. Robert Parker leaned forward now, his voice firmer. You're letting one emotional situation cloud your judgment. If we remove financial controls, this hospital will be overwhelmed. We will have people who never pay, who use emergency services as primary care, who are sick, William interrupted quietly. You're describing sick people. Robert Parker stopped talking. William looked down at the list again, then back up. I visited the waiting room this morning, he said. Do you know what I saw? I saw a man choosing between rent and heart medication. I saw a mother trying to understand a billing form like it was written in a foreign language. I saw people who were not trying to cheat the system. They were trying to survive it. No one spoke. After a long moment, William reached into his coat pocket and pulled out Annie's drawing. He unfolded it and placed it on the table in the middle of the polished surface, right on top of the financial reports and policy documents. The drawing looked small and out of place there, a hospital bed, a small figure holding a woman's hand, and a large, bright sun in the corner. What is that? One of the executives asked. That, William said, is room 614. They all looked at the drawing. That sun, William continued, is there because she said hospitals don't have enough sun. She drew that while her mother was lying in a bed without medication because her file was under financial review. Linda Parker looked at the drawing for a long time. Something in her expression changed, but she said nothing. Robert Parker finally spoke. What do you want, William? William answered without hesitation. I want a new policy, he said. Effective immediately. No essential medication or necessary treatment gets delayed because of billing status. Ever. We create a financial assistance bridge fund if we have to. We restructure non-critical spending. We reduce executive bonuses. I don't care how we do it. But we stop making sick people wait for permission to be treated. One of the executives looked shocked. Reduce executive bonuses? William met his eyes. If the hospital can afford a new marble lobby, it can afford antibiotics. The room fell silent again. Robert Parker looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, You're serious? William nodded. Yes, I am. And if the board refuses? Parker asked. William looked at each of them, then at the drawing on the table. Then I go public, he said calmly, and I explain exactly how many patients in this hospital had their treatment delayed because they couldn't pay fast enough. No one moved, because they all understood what that meant. This was no longer a discussion about policy. This was a line being drawn. And for the first time since he had walked into Street Matthew Hospital, William Carter realized something very clearly. He was no longer just visiting the problem. He was about to become the problem. When William Carter walked out of the glass boardroom, he did not feel victorious. He felt marked. People in positions like his understood something very clearly. You could disagree in private. You could argue in meetings. You could even lose a vote and still remain part of the system. But the moment you threatened to go public, the moment you threatened the structure itself, you stopped being a colleague. You became a liability. Linda Parker caught up with him near the elevator. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile. But when she spoke, her voice was lower than before. You shouldn't have said that in there, she said. William pressed the elevator button. Which part? The part where you said you'd go public. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. The doors closed, sealing them into a quiet metal box that smelled faintly of cleaning solution and stale air. You think I was bluffing, William said. I think you've just declared war on a system that does not lose gracefully, Linda replied. William watched the floor numbers light up one by one as the elevator descended. How many years have you worked for this hospital? He asked. 10, she said. Then you've seen it, he said. You've seen patients delayed because of billing. She didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its legal polish. Yes, she said. I've seen it. And you stayed, William said. She looked at him. So did you, she replied. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. That sentence followed him out into the hallway and stayed with him all the way to room 614. So did you. When he walked into the room, Annie was sitting cross-legged on the chair, reading a small paperback book out loud to her mother. She stopped when she saw him. You came back again, she said. I told you I would, he replied. Sarah looked stronger today, though still pale. You look like you just left a fight, she said. In a way, William answered. Annie closed the book and looked at him carefully. Did you talk to the people in charge? She asked. Yes, he said. Did they listen? She asked. William paused for a moment. They heard me, he said. Listening is a different thing. Annie seemed to understand that better than most adults. He sat down in the chair again. The room was brighter today. Sunlight was coming through the window, landing on the foot of the bed like a quiet promise. Annie noticed it too and smiled slightly. See? She said to her mother. The sun found us. William took Annie's drawing out of his coat pocket and placed it on the tray table. I think this helped, he said. Sarah looked at the drawing, then at him. What did you do? She asked quietly. I asked them how many patients are waiting for treatment because of bills, he said. They gave me a list. And? She asked. And the list is long, he said. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. I know, she whispered. I've met some of them. Annie looked between them. The man in the waiting room with the coughing? She asked. William nodded slowly. Yes. People like him. Annie was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that made both adults look at her. If people are already sick, she said, why do they have to prove they deserve help? No one answered her, because there was no answer that sounded right out loud. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. A nurse stepped in with a clipboard. Miss Johnson, we're scheduling your procedure for tomorrow morning, she said. The doctor wants to run a few more tests this afternoon. Sarah looked surprised. Tomorrow? Yes, the nurse said. It's all been approved. Approved. William noticed the word immediately. Even now, even after everything, the language was still the same. People were not treated because they were sick. They were treated because something had been approved. After the nurse left, Sarah looked at him. This is because of you, she said. This is because you needed treatment, he replied. That's not the same thing in this world, she said quietly. He didn't argue with her, because he knew she was right. Later that afternoon, William walked back through the waiting area again. He saw the same elderly man from the morning, still sitting in the same chair, holding the same prescription paper. He saw a young man arguing with the billing desk. He saw a woman counting money from her purse, then counting it again like the number might change if she tried hard enough. He walked to the billing counter. The clerk looked up. Mr. Carter. William placed the folder of names on the counter. I want to start a bridge fund, he said, immediately, through Carter Foundation. It will cover essential medication and necessary treatments for any patient flagged under financial review until their insurance or payment is resolved. The clerk blinked. I'll have to inform administration. Inform them, William said. Then inform the pharmacy. No essential medication gets delayed because of billing status. If there's a financial gap, the foundation covers it. The clerk nodded quickly and picked up the phone. As William turned to leave, he heard a voice behind him. Why would you do that? It was the elderly man with the prescription. He was looking at William like he was trying to understand something that didn't make sense. William looked at the paper in the man's hand. How much is your medication? He asked. The man hesitated, then said, $240. Insurance covers part of it. I'm short this month. William nodded once, took the prescription gently from his hand, and walked back to the counter. He handed it to the clerk. Put this under the bridge fund, he said. The clerk nodded. Yes, sir. When William handed the prescription back to the man looked at him for a long moment. I worked 42 years, the man said quietly. I never thought I'd have to choose between medicine and groceries. William didn't know what to say to that, so he told him the truth. You shouldn't have to, he said. That evening, when he went back to room 614 again, Annie was sitting by the window, watching the sun go down between the buildings. Did you help the other people? She asked without turning around. William stood beside her and looked out at the city. I started to, he said. She nodded. My mom says when you start something good, you have to finish it, or it doesn't count. William looked at the reflection of the hospital room in the glass, the bed, the chair, Annie's drawing taped to the wall now. I think this is going to take a long time to finish, he said. Annie finally looked up at him. That's okay, she said. I think you're the kind of person who comes back. William Carter looked out at the city lights turning on one by one as the sky went dark. For the first time in many years, he realized he was no longer measuring his life in quarters, profits, and expansion plans. He was measuring it in something much quieter, in how many people didn't have to wait anymore. The first time William Carter saw his name on the evening news, he was sitting in a plastic chair beside Sarah Johnson's hospital bed, holding a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The television mounted in the corner of the room was muted, but the captions rolled clearly across the bottom of the screen. Carter Foundation announces emergency bridge fund for patients under billing review. Annie was the one who noticed first. She pointed at the screen. That's your name, she said. Carter. That's the same name the lady at the desk said. William looked up at the screen, then reached for the remote and lowered the volume even more, as if quieter sound could somehow make the situation smaller. It's just a foundation, he said. Annie tilted her head. Are you rich? She asked. Not in an excited way, just in a curious, practical way. William thought about the question. In his world, people asked that question in numbers. Net worth, market value, assets, equity. Annie asked it like it was a personality trait. I have more money than I need, he said. She considered that. Then why do you still look worried all the time? Sarah let out a small laugh from the bed, the first real laugh since he had met her. That's a very good question, she said. William almost smiled. Because money doesn't fix the things that matter most, he said. Annie nodded like that made sense to her. Then she pointed at the TV again. Are the people on the news mad at you? William looked at the screen again. The headline had changed. Hospital policy under review after Carter intervention. Yes, he said. Some of them are. Did you do something wrong? Annie asked. He thought about the boardroom, the list of names, the policy documents, the way Robert Parker had looked at him when he mentioned going public. I don't think so, William said. But I did something expensive. Sarah watched him carefully. People don't like expensive kindness, she said quietly. It makes cheap cruelty look bad. William looked at her. That was a sentence he would remember for the rest of his life. There was a knock on the door, and Dr. Reed stepped in. He was in his early 60s, with tired eyes and the posture of a man who had spent his entire life leaning over hospital beds. Miss Johnson, he said, smiling gently. Your test results came back. We're going to proceed with the procedure in the morning. It should help significantly with the pain and breathing issues. Sarah nodded. Thank you, doctor. Dr. Reed then looked at William. Mr. Carter, may I speak with you for a moment? They stepped into the hallway. I've been a doctor for 35 years, Dr. Reed said. I've worked in private hospitals, public hospitals, military hospitals, and I'm going to tell you something most administrators will never say out loud. William waited. The system works very well, Doctor, Reed said, for people who can afford for it to work very well. William nodded slowly. And, for everyone else? Dr. Reed looked back toward room 614. For everyone else, it works eventually, if they're lucky. William leaned against the wall, folding his arms. How many patients have you seen get worse while waiting for billing approval? Dr. Reed didn't hesitate. Too many. And why did you stay? William asked. The older doctor smiled sadly. Because sometimes we still save people, and sometimes that has to be enough. William looked down the hallway. Nurses walked past. A patient was being wheeled toward radiology. Phones rang. Machines beeped. The hospital was alive, busy, efficient, and still, people were waiting. I started the bridge fund today, William said. It will cover essential medication and necessary procedures for patients under financial review. Dr. Reed studied him. That's a big move. It's a temporary solution, William said, but temporary is better than nothing. Yes, Dr. Reed said. It is. They stood in silence for a moment. Mr. Carter, the doctor said finally, you should know something. The board is not just concerned about money. They're concerned about precedent. If you prove that the hospital can treat patients without immediate payment, then the question becomes, why didn't we do this before? William nodded. I know. And once people start asking that question, Dr. Reed continued, a lot of very powerful people start to look very bad. William looked back through the window into room 614. Annie was showing her mother the news on the muted television, pointing at the screen, explaining something with serious hand gestures. I'm not doing this to make people look bad, William said. I know, Dr. Reed replied. You're doing it to make something right. But those two things often happen at the same time. That evening, when William returned again, Annie was sitting on the bed beside her mother, braiding a small section of Sarah's hair very carefully. My mom says she might be able to go home in a few days after the procedure, Annie said, but she still can't work for a while. Sarah looked embarrassed again. I don't know how I'm going to pay all of this back, she said. William shook his head slightly. The bridge fund will cover the hospital gap, he said. You can focus on getting better. Sarah looked at him. Why are you really doing this? She asked. Not the polite answer, the real one. William thought about that for a long time before answering. When I was young, he said slowly, my mother got sick. We didn't have much money then. I remember sitting in a hospital waiting room while my father argued with someone behind a glass window about a bill. I remember realizing, even as a kid, that the conversation was not about whether my mother was sick. It was about whether we could afford for her to be sick. Sarah listened without interrupting. She got treatment, William continued. We were lucky, but I never forgot that feeling. Somewhere along the way, I built companies, made money, funded hospitals, and I told myself I was helping people. And maybe I was, but I never went back to the waiting room to see what it felt like on the other side of the glass. Annie tied off the small braid and looked at him. Now you did, she said. Yes, William said quietly. Now I did. She nodded like that completed the story. You know what I think? Annie said. What? He asked. I think some people are rich with money, she said. And some people are rich with time. And some people are rich because they help other people when they don't have to. William looked at her, then at Sarah, then at the small braid Annie had made in her mother's hair. For the first time since all of this had started, he felt something that was not anger, not guilt, not determination. It was something quieter. It felt a little like purpose. And he knew, standing there in that small hospital room, that whatever happened next with the board, with the press, with the system, he was not going to walk away from room 614. Because some doors, once opened, do not let you go back to the person you were before. The morning of Sarah Johnson's procedure arrived quietly, the way important days often do without music. Without warning, just pale sunlight slipping through the hospital blinds and the low hum of machines that never slept. William Carter was already in the hallway when the nurse came to take Sarah to surgery. Annie stood beside the bed, holding her mother's hand with both of hers, speaking in a calm voice that sounded older than it should. I'll be right here when you wake up, Annie said. And Mr. Carter will be here too, so you don't have to worry. Sarah looked at William. You don't have to stay all day, she said. You have a company to run. Important things to do. William shook his head slightly. This is an important thing. Sarah held his gaze for a moment, then nodded, accepting that answer the same way she had accepted pain, bills, and long nights without drama. Just quiet endurance. When the nurses began to wheel the bed out, Annie walked alongside until they reached the double doors marked surgery. She stopped there, because that was as far as she was allowed to go. It's going to be okay, Annie said. Sarah reached out and touched her daughter's cheek. You're very brave, she whispered. Then the doors closed, and Annie was left standing in the hallway, staring at the place where the bed had disappeared. Hospitals had many sounds, footsteps, carts, distant voices, but the quiet outside a surgery room was a different kind of quiet. It was the kind that made people sit very still and think about things they usually tried not to think about. William sat down in one of the chairs along the wall. Annie sat beside him, her feet not quite touching the floor. They sat like that for a long time. After a while, Annie asked, "Do you think hospitals know how scary they are?" William looked at her. "I think they forget," he said. She nodded. "When you're in the bed, it's scary. When you're in the chair, it's scary too. But the people who work here walk around like it's just a normal day. That's because for them, it is a normal day," William said. Annie thought about that. "I don't think I want a job where people forget other people are scared," she said. William looked down the hallway toward the surgery doors. "Neither do I," he said quietly. A television in the corner of the waiting area was playing the news again. This time the volume was on. Carter Medical Group founder William Carter has drawn criticism from several board members after announcing a new financial bridge program that could cost the hospital network millions annually. Some insiders say Carter is acting emotionally rather than financially responsibly. Annie looked at the TV, then at William. "They're talking about you again." William didn't look at the screen. "Yes," he said. "They sound mad," she said. "They are," he replied. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. William thought about the boardroom, the legal teams, the shareholders, the calls he had ignored that morning. "Probably," he said. Annie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mom says if you do the right thing, you still might get in trouble. But you should do the right thing anyway." William looked at her. "Your mom says a lot of smart things. She reads a lot," Annie said. "And she listens when old people talk. She says old people already made all the mistakes, so you should listen to them, so you don't make the same ones." William almost smiled. "That's very good advice." Hours passed slowly. Nurses came and went. Families whispered. Coffee cups piled up in the trash. Every time the surgery doors opened, Annie looked up quickly, then looked down again when it wasn't her mother. Finally, after what felt like the longest morning in the world, Dr. Reed walked through the double doors and looked around the waiting area until he saw them. Annie stood up immediately. Dr. Reed smiled gently. "The procedure went well," he said. "Your mom is in recovery now. She's going to need time to heal, but we expect her to recover." Annie didn't jump or shout. She just closed her eyes for a second and let out a breath she had been holding for days. "Thank you," she said. Dr. Reed nodded, then looked at William. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" They stepped a few feet away. "The board had another meeting this morning," Dr. Reed said quietly. "They're not happy. The bridge fund, the media attention, the policy discussion. This is getting bigger." "I know," William said. "They're saying you're overstepping," the doctor continued. "They're saying you're making the hospital look like it doesn't care about patients." William looked down the hallway toward the recovery rooms. "If the truth makes the hospital look bad," he said, "then the problem isn't the truth." Dr. Reed studied him for a moment. "You know they can remove you from the board," he said. "They can freeze your influence in the network. They can make this very difficult for you." William nodded. "I know. Then why are you doing it?" Dr. Reed asked. William was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Because a girl had to save her mother by asking a stranger for help," he said. "And I was the stranger. And once you become part of a story like that, you don't get to pretend you're not responsible anymore." Dr. Reed nodded slowly. "That may be the most honest answer I've heard in this building in a very long time." When William and Annie were finally allowed into the recovery room later that afternoon, Sarah was still weak and half asleep, but when she saw them, she smiled. "You stayed," she whispered. Annie took her hand carefully. "We said we would," she replied. Sarah looked at William. "You're going to lose a lot of money because of this, aren't you?" she asked quietly. William pulled the chair closer again and sat down like he always did. "Money comes back," he said. "Time doesn't. Health doesn't. People don't." Sarah watched him for a long moment. "You're not just helping us anymore, are you?" she asked. William didn't answer right away. In the reflection of the recovery room window, he could see Annie standing beside the bed. Small but steady, like she had been standing there her whole life. "No," he said finally. "I don't think I am." Annie looked at him. Are you going to help the other people on the list? She asked. William thought about the names in the folder. The waiting room, the boardroom, the news, the cost, the consequences. Then he looked back at Annie. Yes, he said. I am. And as he said it, he realized something important. This was the moment where helping one patient turned into fighting a system. And systems, he knew better than anyone, did not give up without a fight. William Carter knew the call was coming before his phone even rang. He was standing by the window in Sarah's recovery room, looking down at the city traffic crawling slowly through the late afternoon light when his phone began to vibrate in his pocket. He looked at the screen. Robert Parker. William stepped quietly into the hallway before answering. Robert, he said, where are you? Parker's voice was calm, but there was steel under it now. At the hospital, William replied. Of course you are, Parker said. We need to talk. Now. I figured we did, William said. Not on the phone, Parker replied. In person. Come to the office. William glanced back through the small glass window into Sarah's room. Annie was sitting beside the bed, talking softly while Sarah rested. For a moment, he considered not going. For a moment, he considered staying in that small room where the world was simple. A patient, a child, a promise. But the problem he had stepped into did not live in room 614. It lived in offices, contracts, and decisions made by people who never heard the sound of a patient trying to breathe at 2 a.m. I'll be there in an hour, William said. Good, Parker replied, and hung up. When William went back into the room, Annie looked up immediately. You have to go, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, he said. She nodded. Important people again? Yes, he said. Sarah opened her eyes slightly. You don't have to fight all my battles, she murmured. William pulled the chair closer one more time. This isn't just your battle, he said. She studied his face, like she was trying to understand how a stranger had walked into her life and somehow ended up in a war on her behalf. Be careful, she said quietly. Systems don't like people who make them look at themselves. William nodded once. I know. Annie slid off the chair and walked over to him. She handed him the drawing again, the one with the sun. You should keep this with you, she said. In case the important people make you forget why you're doing this. William took the paper and folded it carefully, placing it back into his coat pocket. I don't think I could forget, he said. You might, Annie said simply. Grown-ups forget things when other grown-ups start talking about money. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Then I'll keep this with me, he said. The Carter Medical Group headquarters was only 15 minutes away, but it felt like a different world from the hospital. The building was glass and steel, the lobby quiet and polished, the air smelling faintly of expensive coffee and new carpet. People in suits walked quickly, carrying tablets and talking about projections, partnerships, and quarterly reports. This was William's world, or at least, it had been. When he walked into the boardroom, Robert Parker was already there, along with 3 other board members and Linda Parker. No one smiled. Robert gestured to the chair at the end of the table. Sit down, William. William sat. Robert folded his hands on the table. You went to the press. I announced a bridge fund, William said. The press found it interesting. You made the hospital look like it was denying care to patients, one of the board members said sharply. William looked at him. Was it not? That's not the point, the man snapped. William leaned back slightly. It seems like exactly the point. Robert Parker's voice cut through the room. You're creating a narrative that the hospital values money over patients. William didn't raise his voice. I didn't create that narrative, he said. I walked into it. Linda Parker spoke more calmly. The board is concerned that your actions are financially reckless and legally dangerous. If you continue down this path, it could affect investor confidence, insurance negotiations, pharmaceutical contracts. Say it plainly, William said. You're worried this will cost money. Yes, Robert Parker said bluntly. We are. William nodded slowly. Good, he said. The room went quiet. Good? Robert repeated. Yes, William said. Because for the first time, we're finally talking about the real problem. Everything in this system is designed to protect money. I'm trying to protect people. And those two things are colliding. One of the board members leaned forward. You built this company, William. You built this system, and now you're trying to tear it down because of one emotional story. William reached into his coat pocket and placed Annie's drawing on the table again. This is not an emotional story, he said. This is a bill. This is a delay. This is what our policies look like in real life. Robert Parker stared at the drawing, then back at William. If you continue this bridge fund and push for policy changes, the board will have to take action. What kind of action? William asked. Robert did not hesitate. We will vote to remove you as acting chairman of the hospital network. The words hung in the air. For a long moment, no one spoke. William looked around the table slowly. These were people he had worked with for years, people he had trusted, negotiated with, built things with. How much? William asked quietly. Robert frowned. What? How much money are we talking about? William said. How much does it cost to make sure patients don't have their medication delayed? That's not a simple number, Linda said. Give me a complicated one, William replied. Robert Parker leaned back in his chair. You're willing to lose your position over this? William thought about the waiting room, the list of names, room 614, Annie standing in the hallway outside the surgery doors, a woman apologizing for being sick because it was expensive. Yes, William said. I am. Robert studied him for a long moment, then said quietly, You always were the most stubborn man in the room. William almost smiled. I always thought I was the most practical man in the room. And now? Robert asked. William looked down at the drawing of the bright sun in the corner of the paper. Now, he said, I think I was just a man who never had to sit in the waiting room long enough. The room fell silent again, because everyone in that room understood what he was really saying. This was no longer a business disagreement. This was a man choosing a side, and everyone else in the room was realizing that if William Carter went through with this, the system they had spent years protecting was about to be tested by the one person rich enough to fight it. William Carter did not speak for several seconds after Robert Parker said the words, We will vote to remove you. The boardroom was very quiet now, not the comfortable quiet of professionals reviewing documents, but the kind of quiet that comes when a line has been drawn, and everyone in the room knows there is no way to step back across it without losing something. William looked down at Annie's drawing on the table. The bright sun in the corner looked almost out of place against the polished wood and financial reports. When is the vote? William asked calmly. Robert Parker watched him carefully. End of the week. That soon? William said. You forced the timeline, Robert replied. The press is already asking questions. Investors are calling. Insurance partners want to know if we're changing reimbursement structures. You didn't just start a charity program. William, you challenged the financial model. William nodded slowly. Good. It needed to be challenged. One of the board members leaned forward. Do you understand what happens if you lose this vote? You lose your position, your authority in the network, your ability to push any policy changes at all. You'll be out. William met his eyes. If I do nothing, I'm already out. I just get to keep the title. No one spoke after that, because everyone in that room understood exactly what he meant. Robert Parker finally said, You built this company with me. We turned it into one of the largest medical networks in the country. Do you really want to burn your own house down? William thought about that question carefully before answering. I'm not trying to burn the house down, he said. I'm trying to fix the part of the house that's on fire while everyone else is arguing about the cost of water. No one had an answer for that either. When William left the building, the late afternoon sun was reflecting off the glass towers, turning the whole city gold. People were walking home from work, talking on phones, carrying groceries, living ordinary lives where the biggest problem might be traffic or a late bill. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment and realized something strange. For the first time in his adult life, he did not know what his life was going to look like in a week, and oddly, that felt more honest than anything had felt in years. He went back to the hospital that evening. Room 614 looked different now. Sarah was sitting up more easily, and Annie had taped 3 more drawings to the wall. One of a tree, one of a house, and one of what looked like 3 stick figures holding hands under a very large sun. You're back, Annie said when he walked in. I said I would be, he replied. Sarah looked at his face for a long moment. You had the meeting, she said. Yes, and it didn't go well, she said. No, William said. It didn't. Annie watched both of them carefully. "Are you in trouble again?" she asked. William pulled the chair closer and sat down. "Yes," he said. "I am." "What kind of trouble?" she asked. "The kind where I might lose my job," he said. Annie frowned. "Because you helped people?" "Yes," he said. She thought about that for a long moment, then said something very quietly. "That doesn't make sense." William nodded. "No," he said. "It doesn't." Sarah looked at him, concern clear in her face now. "You shouldn't lose everything because of us," she said. "That's not a fair trade." William shook his head. "You didn't ask me to do any of this," he said. "You asked for help for your mom. Everything else, that was my choice." Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "People with power always say they don't have a choice. They say the system, the board, the investors, the rules. They say their hands are tied. But the truth is, they do have a choice. It's just that the right choice costs more." William looked at her and realized she understood this world far better than most executives he knew. "They're voting at the end of the week," he said. "They're going to try to remove me." Annie absorbed that information in silence. "Will that make you poor?" she asked. William almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No," he said. "It will just make me less powerful." She nodded slowly. "My mom says power is when you can help someone, and nobody can stop you." William looked at her. "Your mom is a very wise woman." Sarah smiled faintly. "I learned from patience. When you take care of people long enough, they tell you the truth about the world." Annie slid off the chair and walked over to the wall where her drawings were taped. She pulled one down and handed it to William. In this drawing, there were many small stick figures in beds, and one big stick figure standing in the middle of the room. Above them, instead of one sun, she had drawn many small suns. "What's this?" William asked. "That's the hospital," Annie said. "Those are all the people waiting. And that's you." "Why are there so many suns?" he asked. "Because one sun is not enough for that many people," she said. William looked at the drawing for a long time. One sun is not enough for that many people. He folded the paper carefully and put it into his coat pocket with the first drawing. "I don't know if I can fix everything," he said quietly. Annie nodded. "You don't have to fix everything," she said. "You just have to not walk away." Sarah looked at him, her eyes steady now, stronger than when he had first met her. "She's right," she said. "Most people don't lose faith because the world is broken. They lose faith because people who could help decide not to." William sat there in the small hospital room, looking at the drawings on the wall, listening to the steady beep of the monitor, and he realized that this room had become the only place in his life where the truth was simple. People were sick, people needed help, and someone had to decide whether to help them or not. Everything else, titles, boards, money, reputation, was just noise around that decision. "End of the week," he said quietly, almost to himself. Annie tilted her head. "What happens at the end of the week?" William looked at her. "At the end of the week," he said, "we find out how expensive doing the right thing really is." Annie thought about that, then nodded like she understood something most adults didn't. "Then we'll be here," she said, "so you don't have to be alone when it happens." The vote was scheduled for Friday morning. William Carter knew because the email arrived at 5:12 a.m., long before the city woke up. Long before the hospital hallways filled with carts and voices and the smell of burnt coffee. The subject line was short and polite, the way powerful decisions often were. Board review and leadership vote. 9 a.m. 10. He read it once, then closed the phone and sat in silence for a while. His apartment was quiet, the city outside still gray with early morning light. For years, his days had started with market reports, expansion plans, acquisition meetings, numbers that went up, numbers that went down, numbers that decided whether a year was called success or failure. Now everything seemed to be decided by a different number. Votes. He arrived at the hospital before 7. Not because he had to, but because there was only one place he wanted to be before the vote. Room 614. Sarah was sitting in the chair by the window when he walked in, wrapped in a light hospital blanket. Annie was helping her slowly braid her hair again, very carefully. like it was important to get every small part right. "You're walking more," William said. Sarah smiled a little. "They say I can go home in a few days if I keep improving." "That's good," he said. Annie looked at him immediately. "Today is the important day," she said. He nodded. "Yes, it is. Are you scared?" she asked. William thought about the question. He thought about the boardroom, the headlines, the contracts, the reputation he had spent 20 years building. "Yes," he said. "A little." Annie nodded, like that was the correct answer. "It's okay," she said. "Brave people are scared. They just do the right thing anyway." Sarah looked at her daughter and then at William. "She's been giving speeches all morning," she said softly. William pulled the chair closer and sat down. For a few minutes, none of them spoke. Morning light filled the room, soft and quiet. On the wall were Annie's drawings, the sun, the hospital room, the small figures holding hands. "I need to tell you something," William said finally. Sarah watched his face and understood immediately. "They're going to remove you," she said. "They're going to vote," he replied. "And yes, they probably will." Annie frowned. "Because you helped people?" "Yes," he said. She shook her head slowly. "That still doesn't make sense." "No," he said. "It doesn't." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking," she said. "All these years I thought the system was just the system. Like the weather. Something you survive, not something you change. But you walked in here and started changing things in a week. Do you know what that means?" William looked at her. "What?" "It means the system isn't the weather," she said. "It's people. And people can choose." William sat very still after she said that. People can choose. At 8:30, his phone buzzed again. A reminder. Board meeting in 30 minutes. He stood up slowly. Annie slid off the chair and walked over to him. She held out her hand, and when he took it, she pressed something small into his palm. It was a coin. A quarter, worn and a little scratched. "What's this?" he asked. "It's from my savings," she said. "I was saving for something special, but I think you need it today." William closed his fingers around the coin. "Why would I need a quarter?" he asked gently. She looked up at him very seriously. "So you remember," she said. "This is what money looks like when you don't have a lot of it. It's heavy when it's the only one you have." He couldn't speak for a moment, so he just nodded and put the coin in his pocket next to the drawings. "I'll come back after the meeting," he said. "We'll be here," Annie replied. As William walked out of the hospital and into the morning air, he realized something strange. He had signed deals worth billions of dollars. He had negotiated contracts across continents. He had spoken in rooms full of powerful people who waited for him to talk. But he had never walked into a room where the only thing he was bringing with him was a child's drawing and a single coin. The boardroom was already full when he arrived. Robert Parker sat at the head of the table. Linda Parker was beside him. The other board members sat with folders open, pens ready, faces serious. "Let's begin," Robert said. The meeting was efficient, professional, cold. Financial projections were discussed. Risk exposure, media response, investor concerns, legal liability. Words like sustainability, restructuring, fiduciary duty filled the room. Then Robert looked at William. "Before the vote," he said, "you have the floor." William stood up slowly. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He looked around the room at the people he had built this company with. People who believed they were protecting something important. Then he reached into his pocket and placed 3 things on the table. Annie's first drawing, the hospital room with the sun. The second drawing, the many beds and many sons. And the quarter. The board members looked at the items, confused. "This," William said quietly, pointing to the drawings, "is what our policies look like in real life." He then touched the quarter. "And this," he said, "is what money looks like when you don't have enough of it and someone you love is sick." No one spoke. "I built this company," William continued. "I am proud of what we built. We saved lives. We created jobs. We developed treatments. But somewhere along the way, we built a system that is financially efficient and morally dangerous. We built a system where a child has to walk into a hospital lobby alone and ask a stranger to save her mother because a billing code delayed her medication. He looked at each of them. You're going to vote today, he said. You're going to vote about my position, my authority, my future in this company. That's fine. Titles don't decide whether something is right or wrong. People do. He rested his hand on the drawings. If you vote to remove me because I tried to make sure patients get treated before bills get paid, then I can live with that, he said. What I couldn't live with is sitting in this room, knowing what I know now, and doing nothing. The room was completely silent. William Carter stood at the head of the table, no longer speaking like a billionaire, or a chairman, or a founder. He was speaking like a man who had finally decided what kind of person he was going to be for the rest of his life. Go ahead, he said quietly. Take the vote. Robert Parker looked around the room before the vote began. All in favor of removing William Carter as acting chairman of the hospital network, effective immediately, he said, his voice steady and formal. Raise your hand. For a moment, no one moved. Then one hand went up, then another, then another. William did not look angry. He did not look surprised. He simply watched, his face calm, as the people he had built an empire with slowly raised their hands to remove him from it. Linda Parker was the last to raise her hand. Robert Parker looked at William. The motion passes, he said quietly. Effective immediately. You are no longer acting chairman of the hospital network. The words settled into the room like dust. William nodded once. He did not argue. He did not try to negotiate. He did not ask for another vote. Thank you for making it clear, he said calmly. Robert looked at him for a long moment. You could have stopped this, he said. You could have just run your foundation, made donations, put your name on buildings, and everyone would have been happy. William picked up the drawings and the quarter from the table and put them back into his pocket. Yes, he said. Everyone except the people in the waiting room. No one responded, because there was nothing to say that didn't sound like an excuse. William walked out of the boardroom without another word. No one followed him this time. When he stepped outside the building, the air felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just different. For 20 years, he had walked into that building as someone with authority, someone who could approve budgets, cancel projects, move money, move people, change outcomes with a signature. Now he walked out as a man without a title. But strangely, he did not feel smaller. He got into his car but didn't start the engine right away. He sat there for a long time, looking at the steering wheel, thinking about everything he had just lost: position, power, influence, access. Then he reached into his pocket and took out the quarter Annie had given him. He turned it over in his fingers, looking at the worn edges. This is what money looks like when you don't have a lot of it. It's heavy when it's the only one you have. He closed his hand around the coin, then finally started the car and drove back to the hospital. Room 614 was brighter than usual when he walked in. Sarah was standing beside the bed, slowly folding her clothes into a small bag. Annie was helping her, carefully folding a sweater like she had seen her mother do 100 times. You're standing, William said. Sarah turned and smiled. They're discharging me tomorrow, she said. Dr. Reed says I can recover at home now. Annie looked at William's face immediately. What happened? She asked. He walked into the room and sat down in the chair like he always did. They voted this morning, he said. And? Sarah asked quietly. They removed me, William said. The room was very still. Annie didn't fully understand corporate boards or chairmanships or executive authority. But she understood one thing very clearly. They fired you, she said. William nodded. Yes, they did. She looked down at the floor for a moment, thinking. Then she looked back up at him. Are you going to stop helping people now? She asked. It was such a simple question. No business terms, no legal language. Just the real question underneath everything. William looked at her and answered immediately. No, he said. I'm not. She nodded once, like that was the only answer that mattered. Sarah sat down slowly on the bed. I don't know how to thank you, she said. And I don't know how to live with the fact that you lost so much because you helped us. William shook his head. I didn't lose everything, he said. I just lost a job. That wasn't just a job, Sarah said gently. That was your life's work. William looked around the room, at the drawings on the wall, at the small bag of clothes, at Annie, standing beside her mother like she always had, at the window where the late afternoon sun was coming through again. "I thought it was my life's work," he said quietly. "But I think maybe this is—" Annie walked over and sat in the chair across from him. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. William thought about the question. He thought about the list of names, the waiting room, the bridge fund, the boardroom, the vote. "I'm going to build something," he said slowly. "Something where no one has to wait because of a bill. Something small at first, but real." "A new hospital?" Annie asked. "Maybe not a big hospital," he said. "Maybe a clinic, maybe a place where people can come and get help, and we figure out the money later." Annie's face lit up slightly. "You can put a big sun on the wall," she said. William smiled. "Yes," he said. "I think we will." Sarah looked at him carefully. "You're serious," she said. "Yes," he replied. "I am." She shook her head slightly, not in disbelief, but in amazement. "Most people spend their whole lives trying to become powerful," she said. "You just gave power away." William thought about that for a moment. "I don't think I gave it away," he said. "I think I finally used it." That evening, as the sun set outside the hospital window, Annie taped one last drawing to the wall above the bed. This one was different. It was a small building with a big sun over it. In front of the building were many small figures, and one taller figure standing by the door. Above the building she had written, in careful, uneven letters, "A place where people don't have to wait." William stood there looking at the drawing for a long time. He had lost his title that morning. He had lost his position. He had lost his seat at the head of the table. But standing there in that small hospital room, looking at a child's drawing taped to a wall with medical tape, William Carter realized something most powerful men never understand until it is too late. He had not lost his purpose. He had found it. The next morning, Sarah Johnson left Street, Matthew Hospital with a small bag of clothes, a folder of discharge papers, and a body that still moved slowly, carefully, like someone learning how to trust the ground again. Annie walked beside her, carrying the bag even though it was almost too heavy for her. William walked a few steps behind them, not because he needed to, but because he had learned that sometimes people needed to feel like they were walking on their own. Outside the hospital, the air was cool and bright. Morning traffic moved through the streets. People hurried past with coffee cups and briefcases, living in a world where this was just another Tuesday. Sarah stopped on the sidewalk and looked up at the hospital building. "I hope I don't see the inside of that place again for a very long time," she said. "That makes two of us," William replied. Annie looked up at the building too, then took a small step closer to William. "This place is where I met you," she said. "So I think I will remember it forever." William looked down at her. "I think I will too," he said. Sarah's apartment was on the third floor of an old brick building in Dorchester. The hallway smelled faintly of cooking oil and old carpet. The stairs were narrow and a little uneven. William carried Sarah's bag up the stairs while Annie walked slowly beside her mother, one hand ready in case Sarah lost her balance. When they reached the apartment, Sarah unlocked the door and pushed it open. The apartment was small but clean. A worn couch, a small kitchen table with 2 chairs, a bookshelf filled with paperback novels and old photo frames, a window that looked out over the street where a bus stop stood on the corner. "It's not much," Sarah said, a little embarrassed. "It's home," William said. "That's more than enough." Annie put the bag down and immediately started moving around the apartment, opening windows, straightening pillows, doing small things that made the place feel alive again. "My mom likes the window open in the morning," she said. "She says fresh air makes everything feel possible." Sarah sat down carefully on the couch, clearly exhausted from the trip up the stairs but trying not to show it. William noticed the way she held her side when she thought no one was looking. "You're not supposed to go back to work for a while, are you?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "Doctor says I need a few weeks. Maybe more." "And the job?" he asked. She gave a small shrug. "If I don't go back, they'll find someone else. That's how those places work. There's always someone who needs a job." William nodded slowly. He had spent years studying labor markets and employment trends, but hearing it said like that made it sound very different. He looked around the apartment again. On the wall near the kitchen were Annie's drawings, taped up carefully like they were valuable art. The sun appeared in almost every picture. "I meant what I said yesterday," William said. "About building something. A clinic." Sarah looked at him. "You weren't just talking," she said. "No," he replied. "I wasn't." Annie sat down at the table and looked between them. "The place where people don't have to wait?" she asked. "Yes," William said. "That place." Sarah leaned back against the couch and studied his face. "Do you know how hard that will be?" she asked. "Buildings, staff, equipment, licenses, insurance, funding. You're talking about building a whole system." William nodded. "I know. And you don't even run the hospital network anymore," she said gently. "No," he said. "But I still know how the system works. And I still know people. And I still have enough money to start something small." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Why small?" she asked. "Because small means we can focus on people instead of paperwork," William said. "We start with primary care, basic treatment, medication access. Preventive care. We help people before they end up in emergency rooms with bills they can't pay." Annie listened very carefully, like she was memorizing every word. "My mom could work there," she said suddenly. "When she gets better. She's very good at taking care of people." William looked at Sarah. "I was actually hoping she would," he said. Sarah looked surprised. "You don't even know me," she said. "I know enough," William replied. "I know what kind of person apologizes for being sick because it costs money. I know what kind of person raises a daughter who walks into a hospital lobby alone and asks a stranger for help instead of giving up. That tells me more than a resume." Sarah looked down at her hands. No one had ever offered her a job like that before, not because of her credentials, but because of her character. "I wouldn't even know where to begin," she said quietly. William pulled a small notebook out of his coat pocket and placed it on the table. It was already filled with notes, numbers, names, locations, cost estimates, sketches of floor plans. "I already began," he said. Annie leaned over the table and looked at the pages. "You draw worse than me," she said seriously. William laughed softly. "That's true," he said. "That's why I'm going to need help with the drawings." Sarah flipped through the notebook slowly. "You've really thought about this," she said. "Yes," he said. "Because if I didn't build it, I knew I would spend the rest of my life thinking about room 614 and wondering how many other rooms like it existed." The apartment was quiet for a moment. Outside, a bus stopped on the corner and people got on and off, heading to jobs, to errands, to ordinary days. "What would you call it?" Annie asked. "The clinic," William said. "Yes," he thought for a moment. Then he looked at the drawings on the wall, the sun, the hospital room, the small figures holding hands. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I think it should be something that reminds people they matter. Something that sounds like hope." Annie nodded. "You should put a big sun on the sign," she said, "so people know it's a place where they don't have to be scared." William looked around the small apartment, the worn couch, the tiny kitchen, the drawings on the wall. Sarah sitting there tired but alive. Annie already planning the sign for a clinic that did not exist yet. For the first time since the board vote, he allowed himself to imagine it clearly. A small building, a waiting room where no one was turned away, a pharmacy where medication was given because it was needed, not because it was approved. A place where the first question was, "What's wrong?" not, "How will you pay?" "It won't be easy," he said quietly. Sarah nodded. "Nothing that matters ever is." Annie looked at both of them and smiled slightly. "That's okay," she said. "We're not in a hurry anymore." The clinic did not open quickly. It opened slowly, the way honest things usually do. There were permits, inspections, paperwork, city meetings, budget revisions, contractor delays, equipment orders, and 1,000 small problems that did not care about good intentions. William spent his days in worn buildings instead of glass towers, talking to city inspectors instead of investors, negotiating prices for second-hand medical equipment instead of negotiating mergers. But for the first time in his life, every problem he solved felt like it belonged to something real. 3 months after Sarah left the hospital, she could walk up the stairs to her apartment without stopping to rest. 4 months later, she started helping William part-time, first with phone calls, then with paperwork, then with planning patient intake procedures. "You don't build a clinic with money," she told him one afternoon as they sat at a folding table in the middle of a building that still smelled like fresh paint. "You build it with people who care enough to stay when it gets hard." Dr. Reed agreed to work 2 days a week after retiring from the hospital. A young nurse named Kelly joined them. A pharmacist agreed to supply medication at cost. A retired accountant volunteered to help manage billing for patients who could pay something and quietly erase balances for those who could not. They did not call it charity. They called it care. Annie visited the building almost every afternoon after school. She had claimed a small corner of the waiting room as her office, where she drew pictures and talked to everyone who came in like she was the manager. One afternoon, William walked in carrying a small wooden sign. "What's that?" Annie asked, jumping down from her chair. William set the sign on the counter and turned it around so she could see the front. The sign read, "Heart and Hope Clinic." Under the name was a small, painted sun. Annie's eyes widened. "You put the sun," she said. "I told you I would," William replied. Sarah ran her hand over the carved letters slowly. "Heart and Hope," she said. "That's exactly what this place is." They opened the clinic on a Monday morning with no ribbon cutting, no reporters, and no speeches. The first patient was an older man with high blood pressure, who had been cutting his pills in half to make them last longer. The second was a young mother with a sick child and no insurance. The third was a construction worker with a back injury who had been avoiding the hospital because he still owed money from the last time. By noon, the waiting room was full. William stood near the front desk, watching Sarah help a patient fill out a form. Watching Dr. Reed walk slowly from one room to another. Watching Annie hand a cup of water to an elderly woman like it was the most important job in the building. "This is going to work," Annie said, standing beside him. He looked down at her. "You sound very sure." She nodded. "Because people look different when they walk in here," she said. "They're still scared, but not the same kind of scared." "What kind of scared?" he asked. "The kind of scared where you think no one will help you," she said. "That scared is not here." William looked around the room again. For years, he had measured success in numbers, quarterly returns, expansion, growth, stock value, market share. Now he found himself measuring success in quieter ways. In how long people waited before someone spoke to them. In whether patients looked confused when they saw a bill. In how many times he heard the words "thank you" in a single day. One evening, about 6 months after the clinic opened, William stayed late to finish paperwork. The waiting room was empty now. Chairs pushed in. Lights dimmed. On the wall behind the front desk were Annie's drawings. Framed now instead of taped room 614. The many beds and many suns. The small building with the big sun over it. He was locking the front door when Annie's voice came from behind him. "You're still here," she said. He turned around. "So are you." She walked into the waiting room and looked around proudly. "I like it at night," she said. "It feels like the building is resting." William nodded. "It worked hard today." Annie walked over to the wall and looked at her drawings. "Do you remember the hospital?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "I remember." She turned and looked at him. "Are you sad you're not a boss of the big company anymore?" William thought about the boardroom, the vote, the glass building with his name on it. Then he looked around the small clinic, the chairs, the desk, the hallway where Sarah was finishing paperwork, the exam rooms where people had been treated all day without anyone asking for a credit card first. "No," he said. "I'm not sad." "Why not?" she asked. He walked over and stood beside her, looking at the drawings on the wall. "Because before, I was in charge of a lot of money," he said. "Now, I'm in charge of a place where people don't have to be afraid." Annie nodded like that was a good trade. "You know what I think?" she said. "What?" he asked. "I think you're the richest man I know," she said. William smiled a little. "I'm definitely not the richest man in Boston." She shook her head. "Not rich with money," she said. "Rich with people." William looked around the clinic one more time. At the drawings, at the chairs, at the quiet hallway, at the small wooden sign that read Heart and Hope Clinic with a painted sun. He thought about the day his card could open any door in any hospital in the city. He thought about the day a little girl had stopped him in a lobby and said, "My mom is very sick." He thought about a boardroom, a vote, a quarter in his pocket, and a promise he had made in room 614. "I had a lot of money before," he said quietly. But I didn't have this. Annie slipped her hand into his. Now you do, she said. And as William Carter turned off the lights and locked the door of the small clinic, he realized something that most powerful men spend their entire lives trying to learn. He had lost his company. He had lost his title. He had lost his seat at the head of the biggest table in the city. But he had gained something that money, power, and titles had never been able to give him. He had gained a place where, every single day, someone was alive and well because he had decided not to walk away. This story carries a simple but powerful lesson. Sometimes the world does not change because of laws, money, or power, but because one person decides not to walk away. The story reminds us that systems are not made of machines, they are made of people, and people always have a choice. William had money and power for many years, but his life only found true meaning when he chose to use his power to protect those who had none. Annie, a small girl with no money and no status, became the moral compass of the story, proving that courage and kindness do not come from wealth, but from the heart. The message for the audience is clear. Doing the right thing will cost something, sometimes a lot. But a life measured only by money is a poor life. In the end, the richest person is not the one who has the most, but the one who helps the most when it matters. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.